And you can direct your questions either to a particular individual on the panel or a general reflection, and the person who's up here who wants to answer will do so. Go ahead, Katarina.
Thank you very
much. And please identify yourself.
My name is Katarina Eriksson. I also represent the private sector, Tetra Laval Group. We work in the value chain for milk, mainly. Thanks to all speakers, very interesting interventions. But I have a question mainly for IFAD. We work a lot with a number of UN organizations, such as World Food Programme and FAO, and they nowadays have departments that have a task of interacting with the private sector, partnership departments. I think it's quite important to, especially when developing value chains, to work with the private sector, not only when it comes to the investments and the actual project, but also at the project development stage. In our case, we have a lot of knowledge, like Löfbergs has in the coffee sector, we have in the dairy sector. So I think we have a lot to contribute. So how is IFAD working with the private sector? And then I can't help making a comment to the last concluding remark. It's still on the screen here. It says promoting relevant small-scale and affordable agro-processing technologies. I'd like to stress that smallholders can effectively be integrated into industrial value chains. That's what we do all the time in many countries. That's probably more efficient for them to be part of the industrial value chain because they can never compete with the industry with small-scale processing, and not in terms of quality either. That's a general remark, but I think in most cases that would be the case.
Okay, thank you. Sorry. We'll take 3 questions and then.
Thank you so much for, thank you so much for very interesting presentations, and thank you for your presentation, Mr. President. And my name is Maria Schultz. I'm from Stockholm Resilience Center, director of SwedBio. And my question is about managing sort of diversity and the importance of agrobiodiversity. And you mentioned mixed crop systems, but also the role of agroforestry and so on for resilience. I wonder if you have any views on that. Thank you so much.
You mentioned working more specifically with women producers and improving their access. Do you have any examples of exactly how you do that? That's my question. Okay.
Thanks for very nice presentations today, and it's nice to be here. My name is Sofia Bokvist. I'm from the Swedish University of Agricultural Sciences, but also working for the SIDA-funded Agriculture Food Security Program. We heard today from several of the presenters that about 80% of the food production is done by smallholders, and rural farming was mainly discussed, as I understood. We'll be working a lot with urban agriculture and especially urban livestock keeping. And along with this increasing urbanization, I think that is a very important issue that we perhaps should discuss more. So I was thinking in many areas, in some areas, livestock are banned in cities, but it's still going on, and that kind of food production is very important for producing high-value proteins and micronutrients for children, for example. So I was thinking, is there a time, or has been discussed on a higher level, that if strategies to develop urban agriculture in a sustainable way, because I think that's a very important issue as well. I would like to have some reflections on that. Okay. It's not a direct question, but more reflections for me.
Thank you. I will give the word to Mr. President first.
Thank you so much. Maybe I can take some of those questions. I have to admit that the second question, I missed it. So I don't know if you will be able to repeat it, if it was addressed to
Maria's question.
Maria question.
Yeah, I'm sorry about that. So my question is about agrobiodiversity, mixed crop systems, agroforestry, and other kinds of systems, and how you look upon the role of that for resilience. That was my question.
Maybe I will start with exactly this point, the whole agrobiosystem and the agroforestry. It's from an IFAD perspective, that has been a little bit kind of left behind and now is really coming back again to the front line, where we are, and we are working on that with FAO. Somebody mentioned FAO actually earlier from the research side, and it's also a domain where we do believe that the private sector, cooperation with the private sector in terms of those research and the university and the foundations are going to be very, very, very critical. What we are noticing, one thing is to be talking about increasing production, but maybe we don't talk enough about the quality of the production and the nutrition dimension of it. And the more we are striving collectively to lift people out of poverty, moving from low income to middle income status, the more they choose the type of food that they want to. So this for us is the next step that we are engaging on in IFAD. But I have to say that we have been doing that, or we are doing that now together with colleagues in FAO and also some foundation like the Rockefeller Foundation also that is working with us on that. The first point in terms of the private sector, I'll give part of the answer, but also we can also engage at the end of this presentation. Clearly, I spent a part of the day discussing about what we call the Smallholders SME Investment Fund, where we put in together, after having a specific pilot in Uganda with European Union, now we are scaling up, where we set up fund with the private sector directly together with IFAD and other multilateral in kind of a PPP approach. But you invest there with some kind of a steering committee where you have a direct also control in terms of where we're going to fund. And where we are aiming at investing 500,000 or so euro or lower, meaning that we are complementing the IFC. We're not in the big 200 or million type of project. So for us, again, targeting the smallest and the smallholders and focusing on the youth on that. So we can even talk maybe after this presentation that we are clearly moving ahead with the private sector. How do we go with the gender dimension? So historically, IFAD in the past, IFAD is 40 years. I can say that in the past 20, 30 years, the focus on the women has been our trademark, if I can use that expression. So from the concept note, or even when we work with the government to establish the what you call the COSOP, which is kind of our 3 to 6 year cooperation with the government, we have to make sure that the community that we are targeting women community in the rural area. So one of the very first things you do is to organize those communities and to organize them. Their presence in the agriculture, it's very obvious. We all know that. So by organizing themselves, and it's not just on the production, sometimes even in the rural finance activity, we, based on a lot of statistics that we all know in terms of the multiplying effect by putting the money in the women in terms of the impact on the production. Between 2010 and 2015, independent assessment of IFAD activity, we talk about 24 million moved out of poverty, out of which 51% were women. So it's really the whole concept that we start from the gender. And also what we have to do now, in addition to the gender, we are focusing on the nutrition, the climate change, and the youth. So of course, you have the demand coming from a bottom-up approach. Then also you have what you call the corporate priorities that have to meet each other on that, and that will have to continue. I believe the latest point that is the further the 80% smallholders coming from rural, and what about the urban agriculture? And for me, especially when you talk about food insecure region, all of that are complementary, which is first. One may argue that it's not enough. I think you need to look at it from the state and the status of the countries you are dealing with. Countries that are hugely urbanized, you really need to push on that direction. But if you look at countries where 60%, 2/3 of the population remain in the rural area, you will also can understand that the focus, if you want your growth to be inclusive, you really need to make sure that the focus. But again, at the end, you didn't pose the question that way, but I know in some corners, the debate is is either or. That's why I keep saying that no, it's not. It's the same between the smallholder and the commercial farm, where the remark that I believe the first colleague from Ericsson made is important, that you build the smallholders to feed into the food system. From an IFAD perspective, all of that are complementary.
Thank you. Excellent answers. Does anyone on the panel feel that they need to make a contribution at this point? Okay. You won't get off the hook because I have questions, but we should go back to the floor. And are there any other questions or comments from the floor? Yes?
Very good afternoon, and thank you for having us here, audience and the high table, and of course the president of IFAD and the secretary. Rudolf Cleveringa, executive secretary of the Global Water Partnership. Global Water Partnership, elements that have been brought up. I'm really thrilled to find what expertise we can mobilize to address what speakers have brought up as key issues. Capacities are low or immature. Across the board, we've heard that. We've also heard that we all want to meet the ambitions of the Agenda 2030, particularly on 1 and 2, goals 1 and 2. Well, we're involved in, if you want, meeting goal number 5, gender, with 6, access to water and sanitation, and number 17, multi-stakeholders, elements that have been brought up. So I'm actually curious to know what the new enablers are to come to that accelerated delivery. We've got 13 years left. So what we will do differently in not just 2030, but as starting today? And how will those drivers or those enablers overcome the challenges that have not gone away? So thank you for sharing some insights in that we can do with that.
Wrap-up question, I think. Would you like to take on that first, Mr. President?
But I'm not so sure that I have the answer, to be honest with you, but I can only refer to, a month ago in July during the high-level forum in New York, where some of, and I think Swedish was presenting its case on that. So we have those 44 countries that have presented where they stand. Quite frankly, I was quite encouraged that, especially for reasons that I guess we can easily understand, I was quite encouraged that to see after 2 years of adoption of the SDGs, there's the momentum to have the the global strategy ready. So when you go back to the 2000 in the MDG era, by 2005, it took 5 years for countries to start coming up. And here, after 2 years, you really see, and again, including the OECD countries, that one will have argued that, okay, they are not primarily concerned apart from maybe the climate change and so forth. But we see the momentum across the universe. So while the acceleration also means that all of us, that's what we are advocating and making the case that IFAD has to increase decisively its intervention. This has been my mantra since I took over. So in the context of the Addis Ababa Action Plan in terms of financing for development, and we know that ODA, and have to be, we are in a territory where ODA is 1%, so Sweden is one of the top. But globally, we know that we can't count only on ODA. I mean, that goes back to the first intervention we had. So how for us to be creative, for us to tap on different resources while remaining fiscally responsible, how do you really make sure that we maximize, we leverage every single dollar we get from the taxpayers? This is, in my mind, one of the challenge, plus obviously the capacity development in the countries for them to be able to address the challenges.
Thank you. Yeah, I think if you don't mind, if you don't not copyrighted that, we'd like to use it as a wrap-up question for all of the panel members, and then you and I can trade seats next time. Ola, would you like to talk about new drivers? What should we be doing differently?
I think to start with, I agree with the president here that if I had the answer, I would probably get the Nobel Prize in economics next year. I think, first of all, overseas development aid is just a drop in the ocean. We are not there. We won't be able to solve the world's problem, be it democracy, be it economic development, environment, or whatever. We can only be part of the change. We can be, hopefully, as I think most of us hope, we can be sort of facilitators, maybe catalyzers for change. But I think it's a much bigger movement that has to happen if we are to achieve Agenda 2030. And that's where I think part of the solution is, because differently from the Millennium Development Goals, the Agenda 2030 is about all of us. All countries has to commit to this. All countries has to work with this. Everyone has to work with this. It's not only seen as a development program. It's an overall global challenge. And I think we couldn't have had a better start. Then it's up to us all to sort of do whatever we can. In Sweden, it could be not least the awareness raising that we all have to work with this issue. Drivers of change. Well, we are, the government is, the private sector is, and so on. Because I don't think that anyone can say today that we don't know what will happen if we don't do this. So I think this is a global problem that concerns each and every individual everywhere, and it's well known. So it's just to sort of roll up our sleeves and get going.
Okay, thank you. Dr. Hilber, in addition to how you think we should do things differently on new drivers, I had a question for you. I heard on the BBC this morning that Kenya is launching a reality TV show about farm life on farm and how it's profitable and fun, and they're going to send it on television to try to get young audiences to emulate. I don't know. Is that a ridiculous idea, or have you tried anything similar in your training, your agripreneurial training?
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Well, let me start with also concluding that I do not have any solutions. So I will contribute an observation, and it dates back from while I was still based in Nigeria until February this year, working for IATA. And I think it was very encouraging to see the way the Nigerian government took the Agenda 2030 work very seriously and launched a very ambitious project to monitor, to create baselines regarding goal number 2, zero hunger, and then at each state level develop plans to move towards that goal. So like has been said before, there is a momentum, and it is, I cannot account for all countries, but certainly it seems global, and there is a big momentum right now, which I think is encouraging per se. Now, as what we could do differently, I think, again, I'd like to come back to what we can do as a university. And given that we're an agriculture university, most of our activities touches upon almost all of the SDGs, and as we know, they're connected and integrated and not really possible to look at one by one. But what we plan to do and what we want to do is to highlight and also reflect for ourselves, what is it that we do? How does that link to the Sustainable Development Goals, and how can we learn from the process? How can we be even better at contributing to obtaining the Sustainable Development Goals? But we have to define what is it that we do that are the contributions at an aggregate level. And we've, like I said, just started the process, and we're not the only university thinking in along those lines. So I think we will see more of that next year. Now, about reality shows for agripreneurs. Kenya is lagging behind. Nigeria has done that for quite a while already.
Okay.
Nollywood is
They didn't say
the
that on the
pioneers.
BBC.
No,
Okay.
no. So there have been reality shows about youth agripreneurs going on for quite a while. And
Okay, then you need to
seems be-
research on the impact, maybe.
Of course, it will be part of the program.
Good.
Thank you.
Then, Catherine.
Yes, I'm thinking about, I'm thinking about something not completely new, but I think that we could really improve the cooperation between international organizations like IFAD or others. I agree with Karin here from also the private sector that the private sector and the international organization, NGOs, government organizations, I mean, working together, we could create great results, I think, because we have different knowledge and different experience, and we can combine that and really that would help us, I think, reach the goal. So goal number 17, the cooperation, I think the partnership goal is the most important, I think, and also reach the other goals. I just one example is that when you mentioned Lake Tana, we have a project around that area in Ethiopia. So I think that we could maybe connect afterwards to see how to cooperate, because we are both in the same areas, and I think there are other things to do there.
Okay, thank you. That's a good.
Yeah, just briefly, I think, I mean, how much we can, problematize, those issues as kind of global issues is one thing, but at the same time, national policies, innovation in national policies in terms of how they craft, their multi-sector development approaches, I think that's very crucial, and there is no substitute for that. In terms of creating like area-based kind of development, how they cluster certain, put themselves in terms of comparative, advantages in terms of the ecosystem, the production, availability of resources, and many other things. So I think national policies need to be much more innovative within each country, but also regionally in terms of how they can open up, like the trading system is very, very crucial. It influences like livestock, agriculture, and many other elements. So I think more innovation, more creativity in national policies in terms of opening up the potentials and see where they can be developed much more in terms of values and access to market and so on.
Okay, thank you. We have to wind this up here with the last. I had a small question for you that was just to do with when you were talking about agroforestry. Your forestry generally requires fairly secure tenure. It was up in your list of things. And do you have any experience in countries where there is no market for land? How to do that when people don't actually own their property, how they manage? If it's a long answer, we can take it after, during the break. But if you have no experience, you can say that too. And then the how we do things differently. You get the last word.
Well, I believe in the first place that the SDGs is a great achievement, and it might be when they came out, you thought, well, this is another UN global story, but actually this makes people talk about it. It's actions all over. IKEA talks about it. Governments talk about it. UN institutions talks about it. So there are lots of movement on this issue, as well as in this room now, and that kind of focuses on those SDGs, and that you're trying to find the smart, balanced solutions in between them. No one is really higher than the others. You have to find the smart solutions to go further. And evidently, in my perspective, the drivers for the local engagement and enthusiasm, because the ODE money will not be sufficient to pay people to do things. You have to find the drivers that will go on. And if you have the local enthusiasm and engagement in growing things, in planting things, because you believe that you will be the ones who will harvest it, then you have a driver, and that's the universal driver for farming. And that goes for tree growing as well. And that requires, evidently, land tenure reforms. And what do we see? When we look into the State of the World Forests, the last edition, 26 countries have gone for land tenure reforms. That's a little bit as a response to your issue here.
Yeah.
And some of them are quite successful. Some of them are failing. There are good examples in China, good examples in Kenya. There are others. We have failing examples in Europe, Macedonia, where the government and ministers have good intentions, good ideas, and then there is a surprise forest service who says, what is this? Are they taking the jobs out from us? And things like that. You know, you have to do it in a smart way. As well as I was stressing in my presentations, you have to allow the peoples to come together to get force to do the marketing of your things in a fair way. The middle person who brings your stuff to the market will not be the only one who is winning. You have to have a winner in the farm and at the peasant level is itself. So I believe that the notion of land tenure, not necessarily ownership, user rights as they do in China, fine. You see the differences. What they do in Kenya, they legislate by the law, they call it farm forestry. So what you do on your farm, you're allowed to cut and sell, and you know when you have enjoyed harvesting as a farmer, then you plant too. And that's what's happened in the Swedish case, and that will have happened in many areas of Kenya when I visited a few months ago. So I think there is promising.
Okay, thank you very much. I think that our keynote speaker and our panel deserve a very warm round of applause. Would you like to sit and be more comfortable? Sorry. The closing remarks, Madeleine, are you going? No. Okay. Well, I would just like to say that this has been a very interesting discussion on what I see as one of the main functions of the organization I work for and represent sometimes, SIANI, which is the integration of the different, the government, the international institutions, research institutions, the private sector, all of the actors integrating how they work with local communities in terms of managing resources. It seems to me that that's, if everyone's on the same page on that, which we seem to be incredibly, is that by accident? We seem to be very agreed on what the basic framework of how to work with these issues. I'm sure there'll be contentious issues in local areas on specific resources. Water always seems to be a problem. There always seem to be many uses for it, and very rarely, in my experience, does agriculture ever win out on that, in that fight. But anyway, there will be local contentious issues, but the general framework also put forth and very articulately presented in the 17 goals is getting us much closer to talking the same language, which is, in my lifetime, which is rather long, having seen people come from very narrow specialities to this more broad approach, I see it as a tremendous chance to move forward, and I'm very positive. So, thank you, SIANI, and the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and IFAD for organizing this possibility for us to all feel like we have to get out there and really do something positive. Okay. Thank you.